Good day and welcome to our Association for Learning Environments webinar, Post-Occupancy Evaluations, a Key to Healthy and Successful Buildings. We have a great presentation for you today. Our speakers, Shivani Langer, Principal Regional Sustainability Leader at Stantec Architecture, and Christy Bickle, who is a Principal Senior Project Architect at Stantec. They are going to be walking you through today's presentation, so thank you so much for joining us, and I will now turn the call over to our speakers.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, this is Shivani Langer, and like Matt mentioned, myself and Christy Bickle from Stantec are here to present Learning from Experience, the Value of Post-Occupancy Valuations. This presentation comes about from the research that we did under the Research and Benchmarking Program in Stantec. So this is an AI accredited course. You're going to get one CEU through this program. In the program, we would like, these are our learning objectives. We would really like to, at the end of the presentation, for you all to be able to understand what a post-occupancy evaluation includes. Primarily, we would explain what our research defines a post-occupancy evaluation as. We will also give you a brief overview of some of the new standards like the well building standards and how they are concentrating on human health and experience and well-being. We will also explain how post-occupancy evaluations help us understand what approaches and design strategies help and are successful in creating healthy environments. We will also be able to see what kind of lessons learned we can get from post-occupancy evaluations and also define future research needs from these studies. So, like I said, I think the first part for this research is the actual definition of post-occupancy evaluations. People define it in very different ways, and a lot of time people think of POEs as a quantitative study. Throughout our presentation, you will see how we take it much further than quantitative, and we do define it both as a qualitative and a quantitative evaluation. We like to do these studies within 1 to 3 years after occupancy, and you will see a variation in our study today, but our goal is typically to have them done within 1 to 3 years. How do we conduct a post-occupancy evaluation? This is critical because this is, helps us have a successful study or not. So our biggest thing that we want you to take from it that we do a third-party online user satisfaction survey. So that's where the qualitative study comes from. We believe in having it a third-party survey that we will talk about in a few minutes. Quantitative part of the study includes energy and water data collection. We absolutely do want to have interviews with the project teams to understand what we learned from the data we collect. We analyze the data, and you will see our analysis in a few minutes. And then we share lessons learned, and not just internally, we definitely do share it externally with our clients as well as with the industry like we're doing today. And why conduct a post-occupancy evaluation? I hope you understand this by the end of our presentation, that how these are so beneficial in telling us what is successful and not so successful in our design process, and then bring that added value to our clients. There are different project successes and challenges with every project, and the only way we can understand that fully is to go back and understand a project when it's occupied. Like I mentioned in the learning objectives, and especially in this time when we are going through COVID-19 and all of us are taking this webinar from our homes, mostly all of us are taking it from our homes, what is becoming more and more important is to understand health and wellness of our occupants. These new standards, relatively new standards, like the well building standard, is primarily focuses on health and well-being. These 7 core concepts of the standard talk about every aspect of what can influence health and well-being of people that occupy our buildings. This is version 1 of well building standard. There is a version 2, but it's in its pilot program. So we did concentrate on version 1. This well building standard is administered by International Well Building Institute, IWBI, and it also is third-party certified by GBCI, just like LEED is. Just like LEED, which a lot of people are very familiar with, there are tons of different credits, which in case of well, they are called features. There are 105 total features in version 1. Just like LEED has prerequisites, well actually has preconditions, and there are 41 preconditions in well. So it does make sure that we are doing certain things even before we can get the credit or get a project certified. The third-party survey that I talked about that we have been using is by the Center for the Built Environment. It's a University of California, Berkeley organization. They have an indoor environmental quality survey, IEQ survey, that is an industry standard. They have different surveys for different kind of project types. So the one that we use for our study, in this case, was the one for the schools. The interesting part is that we have been using this survey, the third-party survey, for the last 8 years, and well building standard actually defines a precondition for their standard is to use the CBE surveys for 3 years after occupancy. So they are also understanding how important it is to actually do a third-party user satisfaction survey than create your own surveys. So the survey categories that are included in this CBE survey are all the 10 that you see there, which all relate to human health and wellness and user satisfaction. You can actually add 4 additional ones, which can be project specific. So we go to the facilities and we say, these are the ones will be included, but what other 4 do you want to survey? So there have been times when people have told us, let's do low-flow toilets, let's do low-flow faucets. Someone even wanted to do sod as one of their survey categories, and we are able to include that. For us, what was also very important was to add daylight and views into our survey categories, and we paid some additional money to get that. So you are able to customize this or at least add a couple of modules, but the questions are all very similar to or the same as what are sent to all the other schools by CBE, so that you can actually see how your building is performing in relation to other buildings in their database globally. And you will see a little bit in our research how that was very helpful. The user survey style is also very, very helpful. They don't just ask the question about whether or how satisfied you are. So that's one of the question will start with that, how satisfied are you with a certain component of the building. But then it also lists what could be the source of dissatisfaction if you were dissatisfied. And if there is something missing, you can always write this in the other category, what was your source of dissatisfaction. The other really helpful component of the surveys is that even though these surveys are anonymous, you are able to say where do you sit in the building, which orientation are you facing, and what kind of a role do you play. So if these surveys, I forgot to mention that these surveys are only of the adults. We cannot actually survey the students. So the adults include administration, in teachers as well as maintenance staff. So they are able to comment on that in the surveys. And what that helps us do is when we get the survey results back from CVE and look at the raw data, you can actually get into it deep enough to say that there was a problem, it seems like, on the third floor facing north, and that's where people were most dissatisfied. And you can get into that detail and figure out what could be the reason for that dissatisfaction. The other thing that was very helpful throughout in our analysis is because we can actually see the responses by the people, and that those responses could be as descriptive as they wanted them to be, and those gave us a very, very good indication of level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So we have done quite a few POEs throughout our throughout the program, the research and benchmarking program. Today we are going to talk, Christy and I are going to talk about 4 middle schools and the analysis we did of those schools. They're all in Texas. They have similar program scope, and they're all new projects. We are defining them by different names just so that we can talk about it throughout our presentation. The first one is an Energy Star Middle School. It was designed to meet Energy Star concepts. Then the Central Texas Middle School, Houston Middle School, and then the last one is the one we are calling CHIPS Middle School because it was designed to CHIPS rating. These 4 middle schools are all similar in program scope, but they do really differ a little bit in their square footages from 163,000 square feet to 250,000 square feet. And they were, in fact, built all the way from 2009 to 2013. So before we get into the actual individual characteristics of the buildings that we studied, we wanted to show you a little bit about how our analysis looks like, and also the response rates. Like I said, Well Building Standard actually has a precondition of doing user surveys, and the criteria they set on those user surveys is that you have to have a minimum of 30% response rate. We were able to get more than that. We typically do like to get more than even the one school that gave us 50%. And we try and send as many reminders to the schools as possible to get higher percentages as we move through the survey process. The lower graph shows you satisfaction per category. This kind of graph is very, very helpful for us to see how all the 4 schools did in each category that was surveyed. Now, there is a 5th line here, which is what is critical to see as well. The purple line there tells us what the CBE average is. So that is showing us all the schools in the CBE database globally. How did they do on an average in those categories? So it's very, very helpful for us to see where our building stands among all of the other schools that CBE has surveyed. And the primary, just by looking at this graph, we can also see what were our if for lack of a better word, problem areas, right? We have done very well in a lot of the other categories, but we will touch on some of those 2 that we are seeing right there, where 1 or 2 schools of ours were below the CBE average. We are going to now jump into individual categories, and I will hand it over to Christy to talk about our first category, acoustics.
Thanks, Shivani. Like she said, we're going to talk about acoustics first, and our quote on this slide says, "Noise pollution is a relative thing. In a city, it's a jet plane taking off. In a monastery, it's a pen that scratches." So the top graph that you're looking at here shows the percentage of satisfaction with the acoustics of the user's spaces. In general, we did really well based on the CBE average shown in the gray. We did better by approximately 90% when comparing ourselves to other facilities. But looking at our individual user satisfaction shown in the orange, it hovered around 80% for 2 of the schools, but lower than 60% for the other 2. And the chart below shows specific reasons the users could identify why they were dissatisfied. So one area of concern for pretty much all 4 schools was noise from adjacent spaces. And when looking at the raw data, we found it a little difficult to pinpoint the issue when they didn't provide some additional user comments. But that Houston Middle School, they provided almost no comments. So we were like, okay, we're having difficulty finding what the actual issue is. But we went to look at the CHIPS Middle School evaluation, and they provided us quite a few comments. So we were able to look more in detail at their specific items. So as part of our investigation, we actually visited the CHIPS Middle School to hear firsthand what issues they were dealing with. But before going on to the specific issues, I kind of wanted to address 2 terms we're going to talk about. Make sure we all have the same definition when we're thinking about these terms. So a decibel is a unit we use to measure the intensity of a sound. And looking at that first chart, it graphically gives you a reference for varying decibel levels. And I wanted to pinpoint out specific references for the 40 to 50 decibels and the 80 decibel range. So moderate rain is about 40 decibels, and your typical refrigerator is about 50 decibels, and the sound of a truck is about 80 decibels. And then sound transmission class, or STC, is a rating of how well a building partition attenuates sound. So things that can affect how well a partition performs is its mass, its framing methods, and its air tightness. And I kind of wanted to point out that an STC of 40, you can hear loud speech is audible through the partition but not understood. And at 50, shouting is barely audible. And so in general, ST ratings between 40 and 50 is considered pretty good in the industry. But again, sometimes noise is subjective. So now we're going to look at the specific issues that the commenters commented on. So one area in particular was with regards to foldable walls at classrooms. A quote from a user says, "We have foldable walls. We can often hear what's happening in the classroom next to us teaching. And while the foldable wall helps create flexible spaces, if we can't provide adequate acoustic separation when the rooms are used separately, we really haven't given you flexibility." And like I said before, we visited this school and took some decibel readings in a few of the classrooms. One room in particular was being used for small group instruction with our teacher, and the adjacent classroom was a full active classroom. And in the small group classroom, the decibel reading through the partition was about 45 decibels. And if you remember, per industry standards, anything over 40 is considered pretty good. But since one side of the wall was doing quiet work, it was still considered a distraction for some users. So what can we do to allow this kind of flexibility for schools who want it and provide better acoustic separation for the various tasks that can happen in classrooms? Well, first we can specify higher STC rated partitions. We typically specify movable partitions with an STC rating of 54, but many times these get value engineered to a less rated wall. I think the ones at this school in particular were down at an STC 45. So we need to make sure that everyone's in agreement that this is not one of those items we want to skimp on. And second, we need to make sure that the movable walls and the seals are maintained and that the users know how to correctly operate the walls. Because if the seals aren't employed properly, sound can leak through the cracks and reduce the effectiveness of the wall, and you'll get bleed over sound between the classrooms. Another location identified by the users was surrounding the cafeteria. And so when we visited the school, we got to experience the dining space during lunchtime. And we took an ambient noise reading for the cafeteria, which registered at about 80 decibels. So if you remember back to the graph, that's about as loud as a truck. We also visited 3 different classrooms around the dining space where those orange donuts are in the plan. And each of these instructional spaces fell within the acceptable range when their classroom doors were closed. You know, if the doors were open, sound did leak in. But once they were closed, they really fell within that 40 to 50 decibel range. You know, and when we talked to the design team, the cafeteria did have some acoustic wall panels, and it had some acoustic ceiling tile, but it didn't have an acoustic deck. And as you can see from the picture, there's quite a lot of exposed deck area. And the surrounding walls did go to deck with sound insulation. So even though the noise from adjacent space fell within the acceptable range, it was still bothersome for some users. So one way to address some of these issues is to provide additional separation between the quiet and instructional spaces and larger assembly spaces. But when that's not an option, providing a higher STC rated wall or even double walls, which has an airspace in it, which is even better. That's very helpful. When you have doors that open up off of these spaces, you could also provide sound seals at those doors, or maybe even add a vestibule, which would help from that leakage from when doors are open. For the larger assembly space itself, to help lower the decibel levels within those rooms, you can provide additional acoustic panels, and either more acoustic panel ceilings or even acoustic deck would be very helpful. So the Central Texas Middle School, they gave us quite a few comments in regard to the acoustics of their space. One quote says, "We hear the toilet flush every time someone uses it." And another one was, "We hear heels tapping down the hallways above us." In talking with the design team, you know, even with providing all walls to deck with sound bad insulation, they still experience issues such as flushing noise from the toilets. And with this in mind, we really need to be reviewing adjacencies during design. If possible, it's best to locate bathrooms next to louder spaces, but when that's not really an option, you really need to provide additional sound separation to help mitigate that problem. Again, you know, those double walls with the airspace and just looking at the different SEC ratings and acoustical ratings of the different wall types and making sure you're picking the right one that will provide the best isolation between those two spaces. The comment regarding the tapping above the walking down the hallway, that one is actually very informative because we don't always think about the adjacency of spaces below or above the rooms. We're just really looking to the left and the right, up and down, but you know, the vertical adjacencies are very important too. The specific complaint was regarding the classroom over the library, and the library was actually underneath one of those entire wings. So they could hear students moving chairs and desks, plus the tapping of the heels down the long corridor, and it was distracting. And so to help mitigate these types of noise issues, we need to look at the IIC, or Impact Insulation Class, of the floor ceiling assembly. And basically the floor ceiling assemblies and their associated flooring covering can help increase the IIC number, which helps reduce the sound transmission to the lower levels. And you can address this issue from either above or below the deck, or a combination of both would be even better. Some strategies include selection of the floor finish material itself, adding an underlayment to the flooring, and adding a chipboard ceiling assembly below the deck. All those can help with that mitigation, that sound from vertically from above and below. So to sum up some architectural design considerations we have on this list, reverberation time increases background noise, and also to use hard surfaces and exposed structure with caution. You know, also consider the path of travel sound can take. Like all three of our examples benefit from those three considerations. If we really kind of think about those during design, we can help mitigate some of that. And we didn't really cover mechanical noise issues, but in general, limited space for HVAC ductwork can increase their air velocities and increase the noise from the ducts. And when comparing equipment, the noise data, you need to make sure that you're comparing the same noise data from the same standards so that you're really evaluating apples to apples. And like Shivani said, we're kind of tying this back to the well building standards. So in regard to the well building standard, acoustics is under the concept of comfort. And the well building standard aims to mitigate unwanted indoor noise levels and reduce exterior noise intrusions to enhance learning, productivity, and social interaction. Well has recognized acoustics as an important concept, and because of that, it has set preconditions that must be met, and such as limiting exterior noise intrusions to 50 dBA and limiting the internally generated noise to a noise criteria of 35 in classrooms. And I will turn it over to Shivani now.
Thanks, Christy. Great. So our next category that we are going to talk about is daylighting. And I know this first slide gives it away. Actually, just before I get on, I saw a question that has popped up about please define POE by Gloria. And Gloria, our slides 4, 5, and 6 do talk about it, and POE is post-occupancy evaluations. Sorry if the abbreviation wasn't clear, but we define post-occupancy evaluations as quantitative and qualitative way, and that's why we're going through the qualitative aspect right now with user surveys, and we are going to get to the quantitative aspect at the end of our presentation. I will get to we can probably talk about the second question, which is a little bit more description at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to type in your questions as you see them. So daylighting, and like I said, I know the slide says it all, but we're going to tell you why we thought that is the case. So when we started looking at daylighting, this is just looking at what the results came up with, and what was a little bit tough for us to figure out was how our CHIPS middle school did not do very well. It had about 70% user satisfaction, and the kind of comments that we got back were too bright, too much daylight, glare from top windows, do not let them do or do not let the kids see the projection surfaces. The light switches, this was quite a few comments that we got about light switches don't seem to be working because they were on sensors. So we started looking at why that was the case. Why were we seeing low satisfaction or higher dissatisfaction? So we looked at the Houston Middle School, and you can see from those images and the floor plans, the Houston Middle School, which had slightly higher user satisfaction than the CHIPS Middle School, had those 2 punched windows at the corner of the classroom, and that was pretty typical in this school. But if you looked at our CHIPS Middle School, this is truly one of our flagship schools, and it has wall-to-wall glazing. You are seeing the north side glazing right now, which is, those right side of the entrance is all classrooms, and they are wall-to-wall glazing on the second and third floor classrooms. And then when we looked at the south side, it was really well-designed daylight harvesting system. You had light shelves, sunshades. There were sloping ceilings to get the daylight all the way in. But we did, again, get the comments about the glare being too harsh on the projection surfaces. So we remembered that and then we went actually and studied this building live. So we actually went and looked at it, just like Christy mentioned. This was one of the buildings that we went down and saw what was going on. And what was very disturbing for us was that they had gone back and added the blinds on top of the light shelves in the clear story windows. These blinds are completely inaccessible, so they're always down and always closed. But even then, you can see that the smart board was actually not visible to someone from this side of the room. We also remembered that when we had done the elementary school studies, there was something similar that we had noticed. There was an old prototype school design which had 2 punched windows on one side of the classroom, but then a very well daylight harvested classroom, as you see on the new design pictures at the bottom. But when we did our survey analysis, we saw that really the old prototype design actually had higher user satisfaction, as you see in that orange, as compared to the new design. And new design actually did not very well in the CBE average database as well. We were pretty low in that CBE average. So this is where, when I mentioned the learning objectives of how POEs can actually define what our future research should look like. So we have, and this is another presentation altogether, but we have in our research and benchmarking program done a very extensive daylighting research where we have looked at all of these different configurations of windows that we see in classrooms to understand and ask ourselves the question, how does glazing size or configuration, sunshades or light shelves, and orientation of fenestration affect daylight quality and user comfort, heat gain and thermal comfort, and construction costs? Daylight can no longer be just listed as the quantity of daylight. It is the daylight quality that we are looking at, and this research is just completed, and we got to learn a lot from it. But understanding that this research would have never come about if we hadn't done the POEs and seen what our users really want. But coming back to why we are seeing this difference too right now, and why we used to do daylight harvested buildings previously, is because lighting codes have changed. In previous years, daylight harvesting gave us back much higher returns because energy codes were not that stringent. Now with IECC, almost all our buildings are 100% LED lighting, where the payback is not as high for daylight harvested classrooms. Projection technology definitely needs to be specified for the amount of bright light in the classrooms, and that can get quite expensive. In both those schools that you looked at, the technology that would have worked better with bright light was value engineered. So that's a tough thing. Like Christy said, I think value engineering, we have to remember what the decisions we cannot skimp on. And then it's very important to have the right training. People that did not understand how the sensors, daylight sensors worked, were indeed dissatisfied more because they thought the switches were just not functioning. And also, we got some comments back about motion sensors and not functioning. And I think it's very important for us to have commissioning requirements and making sure that everything is functioning when it comes to these kind of sensors in order to get higher user satisfaction at the time we give our clients the completed project. So tying daylighting back to well actually absolutely defines or understands that there is something that we have to also look at. I really like the quote right there. There are two kinds of light, the glow that illuminates and the glare that obscures. And in this case, that's literal. Even LEED version 4 has actually really addressed glare to a very large extent. And the preconditions that WELL has defined because of how important daylight quality is to user comfort and health, they have preconditions that talk about visual acuity, which is all about visual balance. And then it talks about solar glare control and electric glare control. And we have to meet those preconditions to be well certified. I will hand over back to Christy to talk about our next analysis.
Okay, here we're going to just kind of talk a little bit about general design and functionality. So users were asked to rate their satisfaction with the size of their workspace. And looking at the chart, we typically performed about at least 80% better than the CBE average, with the exception of the CHIPS Middle School. All the schools we surveyed had something to say about classroom size and teacher mobility. One quote says, "Too many desks, not enough room." And for TEA, they require a 700 minimum square foot for a maximum of 25 students in grades 1 through 12. So that's what historically has been provided in the program when we're designing new schools. But in speaking with the teachers, it's become very clear that many classrooms are accommodating more than 25 students. And with the increase in flexible learning spaces, the minimum is not enough to allow teachers to use their space effectively. So in programming and designing for new schools, we really need to prove that multiple learning layouts fit within the space we're providing, and that the space that we provide the increased space for the number of students that they're actually serving. So this next slide, we talked a little bit about teacher mobility. One of the comments was about teacher mobility, and we historically, again, have planned the room with a home base for the teacher in mind, where the teacher would sit. This is where we would locate their computer connection and their controls, projectors, but since classrooms are becoming more mobile and reconfigurable, the teacher wants that flexibility too. As these schools are several years old and there were limiting factors, including budget constraints and technology being used by the district at that time, it definitely was limiting the teacher's mobility. However, new technology is being developed all the time, which is allowing the teacher and the student to be more flexible and more mobile. So this is an award-winning middle school we designed recently where the classroom spaces are only used for limited instruction time, but the majority of the students and the teacher time is spent in the larger group area, which incorporates colorful lit areas, spaces, various types of furniture to allow for flexibility and choice, and where the students do their work. And when teachers and students aren't limited by the four walls in their classroom, it provides many more opportunities for various group activities, different teaching strategies, and learning styles. Space and furniture flexibility are only part of the equation. There's also the technology flexibility that needs to be considered. And like I said earlier, new technology is being developed all the time. The ultimate goal is to provide as much flexibility in the underlying infrastructure to make it easier to implement future tech as it becomes available to the schools. And by providing the flexibility that's wanted by the users in terms of technology, space, flexibility of furniture, we're ensuring a higher user comfort. So the WELL Building Standard has identified that healthy work and learning environment should be designed to mitigate stress and optimize productivity, and should therefore be sufficiently adaptable to working, focusing, and collaborating as needed. So there needs to be spaces available for all types of work, so each person can adjust their environment and choose their level of engagement based on their activity. So flexibility in design can help facilitate this need, which can increase satisfaction for both teachers and students. So there are no preconditions for this category, but you can qualify for optimization points by having different types of spaces available to the users. So this says, the cold never bothered me anyway, but honestly, I'm cold all the time. I actually use a heater in the summer. So obviously, thermal comfort is another one of those subjective issues. Two people in the same room can have vastly different experiences based on their personal preferences. So from this graph, you can see how difficult it can be to get a high satisfaction rate. For the most part, it's hard to get 60% or more user satisfaction when it comes to thermal comfort. One user's comment was, we share heat and AC with another room. It's not always comfortable in each room. And a lot of the decisions around thermal comfort aren't totally under our design control. For budget reasons, most schools don't allow for individual classroom control. Sometimes they're grouped like two classrooms together, like in that comment she just made. But then there's also the amount of control allowed by the system, because most districts they decide on the set point, and the thermostats only allow adjustability within a few degrees of that set point. Sometimes the culprit for dissatisfaction can be the scheduling of the systems. They may be assuming that after school hours, the units don't need to be run, but some after-school activities might be taking place, which needs the systems to continue running. And when we share this information back to the district, it helps them start a conversation on how they might adjust the scheduling of their systems or the set points to help mitigate some of the issues and the discomfort for the users. One example of how we were able to pinpoint a specific issue we wouldn't have been aware of was the comment regarding the science room, because in discussions with the design team, we found out that the fume hoods were not specified with dampers, so cold air was leaking back into the room, making them uncomfortable. So with this knowledge, we can make sure that all the future vent hoods are specified correctly. So air quality can also be affected by scheduling decisions. The Energy Star Middle School commented that the air quality category, because of how stuffy the band hall got as the day progressed, and consequently it smelled bad. So this issue was addressed through revised scheduling. And sometimes issues like a non-functional air vent is something that we don't know about, but through this POE and the sulfur smell comment at the top, we were able to find out that there was a non-functioning vent and exhaust and get that corrected. So again, using these comments to help the district identify what's not working and helping them correct those issues. And sometimes thermal comfort is sacrificed for energy conservation purposes. One comment from the thermal slide before said, room is very, very hot, not too tough to concentrate. Shivani's going to be discussing more about energy usage, but we were interested in finding out whether or not the thermal comfort satisfaction rate correlated to the energy efficiency of the building. And this graph shows the thermal satisfaction percentage in relation to the energy efficiency of the building. And you can see that the most energy efficient building, the Energy Star Middle School, also had the lowest satisfaction rate when it came to thermal comfort. So there needs to be a balance between the two issues, and there needs to be an understanding of why, perhaps additional training given to the staff related to this issue for a better understanding of why they've got things set as they are, and how discussion back and forth between the users and the district can help mitigate those issues. So energy efficient buildings are only as effective when the occupants of the building are comfortable. If they're not comfortable, then they're going to take alternate means to heat or cool their space, such as I do with my heater in the summer. So preconditions to meet well for thermal comfort include providing all spaces to meet ASHRAE 55 requirements for thermal comfort, and ASHRAE 55 addresses various combinations of indoor thermal environmental factors as well as personal factors that's aimed to produce a thermal environment conditions acceptable to the majority of its occupants. So again, they're trying to meet what's comfortable for the majority of the people, so there's always going to be someone who's probably not that happy. But an optimization is available when providing a 5-degree variation and 50% free address in open offices, meaning you provide spaces that have 5-degree temperature variation, and people have the opportunity to move their personal workspace to the area in which they feel more comfortable. And I'll turn it back to Shivani.
Thank you, Christy. So like Christy mentioned, I'm going to get a little bit into energy usage. This is going to be the quantitative aspect of our study. We just looked at all the qualitative aspect, but let's get into the actual. We do collect actual energy data usage of the buildings to keep a track of how our buildings perform. I hope everyone was lazy to be able to do as much energy savings, just talking about that image up there. But looking at, I know there's a lot of data on this slide, but we wanted to see how our buildings were performing and relate them to each other as well, and that's why you see so much on the slide. The costs on the HVAC costs per square foot are actually, they have been converted to $2013 because of the cost of construction, and these projects were built between 2009 and 2013. On the left, you see that when we did have predicted energy usage, so we did perform energy modeling for the Central Texas School and the CHIPS Middle School, and those that's why those numbers are in there. But when we did not have the predicted energy usage, we are using the CBEX 2003 data, which is the Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, which is nationwide, and the 2003 data is what 2030 commitment uses, and that's actually 75. So the units for this energy usage is kBTU per square foot per year, which is a very common unit that is used for energy usage, also known as energy use intensity, EUI. So you can see that our projects have really done well, except for that Houston Middle School that, it did not have not that the cost of construction was too low. It was pretty comparable to the cost of construction of the other systems. And then when we went and dug deep, we realized that this was the project where our clients wanted to use existing chillers that were owned by the district. And this is what caused that project to perform, energy usage to be that high, even though the Central Texas and the Houston Middle School had exactly the same system of HVAC as listed on the right side. They were both single duct variable volume systems and air-cooled chillers. The Energy Star one was all geothermal, and that was one of the reasons why it has very low energy usage. And then that's how we end up actually keeping a track of all of our projects. This is where POEs come very, very useful as well. We are constantly collecting energy use data from our schools, and these are, even if we haven't done the overall POE study like you see today, we do collect energy use data for more of our schools. And we kind of keep a track of them, and you see that as we are moving along, and some of the schools that are studied are in this study are all listed there as well, but 75 being the CBEX 2003 average, our schools have done really well. We have a net zero school that is 20 EUI, and then the CHIPS school was 22.4 EUI, which was very, very it was great for us to see, but also to understand why it was performing the way it was and try to learn from it. I know there is a comment or a question on our question slides as well, and I will get into that in a second, but this is kind of related to it. Every year, the Center for the Built Environment looks at all the surveys that they perform, that the industry is performing. So when we use the CB's database, they actually put our schools and look at it in relation to the other schools. This particular year in 2016, 3 of our schools that we studied were actually finalists among the Center for the Built Environment's Livable Buildings Award. This award is given for highest user satisfaction and the lowest energy usage of buildings that were studied during that year. And the Energy Star Middle School actually won the award because it had very high user satisfaction, but also performed 70% better than an average school when it came to energy usage. I'm going to read a quote from one of our managing directors, and he said, "It is wonderful to be recognized for strong aesthetics, but it is even greater when the measured energy performance and feedback from the users is what makes a building stand out." And that is truly a testament to a good design when the users are actually what gives us the award. And it is not possible if we didn't do the post-occupancy valuations to see our successes, but also our challenges. I will like to end our presentation by just emphasizing why post-occupancy valuations, and we like to ask why not, right? I once heard, this is not my analysis, but I once heard that even a small equipment like a microwave goes through immense customer reviews and customer satisfaction comments before they put out another microwave or they create another microwave. And we are designing buildings for years to come. Why should we not pause and do an analysis of our buildings after occupancy to learn from them and inform our future designs? It tells us how well-being helps us define what actually helps with the well-being of users. It's helpful in teaching us lessons learned and helps us in designing healthy buildings. It makes us a better professional and helps us make better decisions. It is the only way we can prove the effectiveness of our concepts. It helps our owners make proven, informed decisions, and it teaches ourselves and clients how to improve built environments. And that is actually the end of our presentations, and we'll open up to questions. And I see a few on the right side.
Yeah, we've had several questions come in here during the presentation, but if you do have any questions for Christy and Shivani, you can go ahead and type those into the Q&A pod, and we'll use our final moments here to go over those questions. Now, I know that you guys can see the questions that are in here. Let's just start at the top with John's question asking about your user survey analysis slide. And he was asking how old is the CBE averages data? Are they only surveying LEED and CHIP certified projects?
That's great. Very, very good question. So no, they are not only surveying LEED and CHIP certified projects. As you can see, a lot of our projects actually were not CHIPS or LEED certified. These were projects that had different design goals coming from the clients and from us, and some different kind of restrictions when it came to budget and program requirements. So any project can use CBE surveys. It's just that it is to our benefit to use the specific project type survey. So we use the school survey, but for higher ed buildings, for example, we use a different survey. For residence halls, there is a different survey. So they have different project type surveys. To answer the next question, next part of the question, the surveys that we did and the analysis that we did was in 2015, 2016. So that is why we won that award in 2016, because final results came from CBE in 2016 and we analyzed it. The average that you see of the CBE database and what we are using as numbers is all of the schools that they have studied for over the years of their surveys. So it doesn't just do it for yearly survey, but the number that we get of user satisfaction is for all the schools in their database. But the award, the Livable Buildings Award, is annual. So our projects are competing for that award for just the schools that were surveyed that year. Okay, hopefully that answered the question.
Okay. Andrea's question is up next there, asking you from start to finish of POE, what is the typical timeline? How long does it take to administer and do the analysis?
Great question again. It's been it varies. Sometimes we could potentially do them in a year, but mostly it has taken us about 2 years from the start of having the discussions with the clients to actually timing them right so that the teachers have the time to take the surveys. Sometimes even to get the answers from them about what additional topics do they want to survey. It takes us some time to get the principals to answer that question. And then once we administer the survey, we run it for about 2 to 4 weeks. the CDE takes about another 2 to 4 weeks to give us back the answers, and then we wait for a couple of middle, schools of a similar type to do our analysis. So I would say 1.5 years to 2 years is what we have seen.
Okay.
Gloria, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, do you want to address that, Gloria, question? I assume that probably came in for a specific slide.
I saw when it came in, and that one is, it is Manor New Tech School. It's Manor ISD in Central Texas.
And Gloria, that was your question about which school had the seldom used CR. Okay, our next question comes from James asking if you use pre-occupancy evaluations in your process.
Again, a great question. We have tried. We have actually talked to our clients especially if you all are familiar with the concept of reciting a project. Sometimes our school districts do recite projects from one site to the other, primarily elementary schools. And we would love to do it, but we have not been successful in getting that done so far. But that's a perfect candidate to actually do a pre-occupancy survey in an existing building before we use the same design on a different site.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Sarah, and she was asking if you were aiming to meet these well standards before you started to design the building. Therefore, it was a core part of your entire design process.
Sarah, no, not for these projects, because they were actually designed before well was, I think it was in play, but it wasn't fully known, especially at the 2013 projects. So no, but I think when we, our big portion of our presentation today, when we wanted to analyze, or when we are talking about post-occupancy valuations, we wanted to emphasize how important it is to actually understand our buildings in relation to health and comfort of occupants, and bringing these kind of standards in to light is important, because it's not just something that we think is important, but there are standards that are coming up with these requirements. And also, we are talking about well concepts in our current designs, at least to some, even if the clients are not, well building standard is expensive, and even if our clients are not really willing to pay for the standard itself, we do bring up those concepts in our design dialogues.
Okay, and we have one last question in the queue from Shannon asking, what is the approximate cost per school to perform the POE, or how do you determine the cost of this evaluation?
A very good question. Again, so very, I guess the cost, the actual cost of the survey, the CBE survey, is about $1,000. That's the just core categories, the 10 core categories we showed, but because we added 2 other modules of lighting and views, we pay $300 per module, so that makes it $1,600 for just getting the survey, using the survey by CBE. The rest of the cost is completely on our research and benchmarking program. We do put together some budget for the program, but the hours are not charged. We have been doing this in our budget, and we haven't had a client pay for it yet. But we would be very, very happy if we can get this as additional services. But at this point, because we think the research is so important and how much we learn from it, we've been paying it through our research budget.
Okay, and another question has come in from Jillian asking if the data you collected on daylighting's impact on the visibility of the teaching wall, if that changed the window placement in your classrooms for future designs, and how?
Absolutely. The question is, yes, I think it's interesting how now we always talk about window-to-wall ratios in classrooms. I've had designers, ask while they are designing what is the ideal classroom window size. And again, it's not a very easy answer, but at least it's an answer. The thing is that we are thinking about it constantly. And it's an easy answer to say that if you are more than a certain percentage of glazing, you definitely have to prove whether that's the right decision or not. So you'll have to mitigate that with certain other things like good projection technology or blinds or shades, and remember that those will be down all the time. But the thought process has started, and there's always a question about it because of the study that we did.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that have come in, and we have reached our time. Speakers, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
This was great, Matt. Thank you so much. And everyone, feel free to send us questions if you need. I know one or two slides had some of our captions or some things missing at the bottom. If you do see them in your handouts, and if you need more information, you can reach out to Christy or I at any time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And I want to thank all our registrants for attending the program. You'll get a certificate of attendance and evaluation form within 24 hours if you attended the live program. If you're watching the on-demand version later, you can press the complete button at the top of the video player in order to take your evaluation and get your CE certificate. You can get registered for all of our upcoming live webinars as well as on-demand recordings of previous programs over at education.a4le.org.